Hello everyone. Welcome to the TIFR camp colloquium. I would like to introduce Shrikar Vadlamani. He is from our own institute at TIFR, and he'll be telling us about how we can use Markov random fields to understand the spatio-temporal variability of Indian monsoon rainfall. So over to you, Shrikar.
Thank you, Nishant. First, some disclaimers. I am in no way an expert in monsoon variability and related subjects. So if there are any experts in the audience and if I'm saying anything which doesn't make any sense, then it is something that it is not making sense. So don't feel that that what I am saying, I'm completely prepared for it. So if you have any questions, please ask. I'm very sure that I'll make some mistakes. So if there are any mistakes and if you find them out, please let me know. I will be happy to correct them. Yes, so let us begin. So broadly speaking, the idea of this talk is to give a simple application or is to rather just present a simple application of a Markov random field model to the setup of Indian summer monsoon. So what do I really mean? We are going to be looking at the spatial and the temporal expanse of the data set that is coming from the Indian summer monsoon, which is basically a very old data set. It's called a Rajivan data set for the reason that M. Rajivan, who was the ex-director of the IITM in Pune, he had cleaned up this data set and it was basically put out in public in his paper. So this is called a Rajivan data set, and we are going to be looking at the data set of this data set, which is 357 locations in India over a period of several years. We will be only focusing on the years 2000 to 2007. So that is 8 years. Okay. And we will be trying to understand if there is any temporal structure which is present in the data set, which can possibly be explained using a certain model. And what better model than a Markov random Markov field, because we know that there is this kind of a very nice dependent structure in the weather modeling, that we know that today's weather is very likely going to be affected by what happened yesterday. So, and if I know yesterday's weather, I need not possibly know day before yesterday's weather. So once again, it's not something which is a factual thing which is given by the oracle. It is just something like an assumption that we are going to be imposing. And it seems like a natural assumption in terms of when we talk about weather. And also, if I am in Bangalore, and if I know the weather of the neighboring areas around Bangalore, then possibly I don't need to know outside Bangalore weather in order to infer something about the weather in Bangalore. Okay, so there is, because of the natural continuity of the various physical processes, which basically give us this kind of a Markovian structure. So let us begin. So just a small warm-up that whenever we talk about Indian monsoon, actually, we forget that we have two monsoons in India. One is called the summer monsoon, which is basically from June to September. And the other is called the winter monsoon, which is what we are experiencing right now. And it is rather unforeseen that the winter monsoon gets so much of rain. Typically, it is a summer monsoon, which really accounts for much of rainfall in the Indian subcontinent. So just two pictures showing really stark difference between the two monsoons. One monsoon basically starts from Kerala, goes all the way, covers all the way to northeast, goes here, and then covers this Indian subcontinent in this direction. However, the winter monsoon, on the other hand, basically comes from the Himalayas and then goes downward. So which is why all the rain accumulation happens in this region, and this is rather dry in winter, in the winter monsoon. All right, and once again, some terminology that these two monsoons are widely believed, or rather the climatologists, they all believe that these two are, the major reason is basically the upward and the downward, or the northward or the southward movement of what is called the ITCZ, which is the Intertropical Convergence Zone. So these are basically some wind patterns which are converging in some, in the summer, it is converging in one region, and in winter, it is converging in a different region. Okay, so, and this broadly happens because of the axial tilt of the planet. You see that even though we are talking about a very small region on the face of Earth, the happenings in this small region are actually affected by these very global processes. So, which is why in the abstract I had mentioned that even though we are looking at this very in a very rather a small box on the face of Earth, but we must understand the processes that we are the observations that we are looking at in this small box are actually a result of several physical processes which are being driven around at different scales. So spatial and temporal. So there are these winds which are running all around the Earth, which are at a planetary scale. And then there are these local wind patterns, which are at a much lower altitude. So, and they also affect the weather. So there are several scales like temporal and spatial, which are affecting the output, which is the monsoon over here. So even though we want to understand this monsoon, and we really, I mean, honestly want to understand monsoon, but the moment I said that I'm going to only look at this Indian subcontinent region, I have already made a big mistake by saying that that I'm going to be only concentrating my focusing my attention only on this box. I am going to rule out all the effects which are coming from outside. So in that sense, we are going to be basically ignoring all the physical processes which are coming from outside this box. So just to show what exactly has been the pattern for Indian monsoon in the past 100 or so years. So this is the plot that you are looking at is basically called the anomaly plot for the Indian summer monsoon rainfall. This is basically plotting the difference, or how much did the annual rainfall differ from the mean the climatological mean of the Indian summer monsoon. So you see that in this year, the mean rainfall over the entire Indian subcontinent was significantly below. It is minus 30%, and which is why this was a very bad drought. And basically, a drought is whenever the anomaly is less than minus 10%, and it is a flood if it is the anomaly is higher than plus 10%. So we do realize that there is a small trouble in this plot. The moment I'm talking about monsoon as, and I'm talking about the entire India as one single observation. So this single number basically is denoting the total rainfall received in the entire Indian subcontinent for that particular year, and then I'm plotting the anomaly. But then we know that there is a spatial variability. When it says that this is a flood year, the entire country did not get flooded. there were some specific regions which got flooded, and there were some regions which were left high and dry. So even though we are looking at this pattern and we see immediately, okay, this is the drought year, 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 but in these drought years itself, there may have been floods. So we do want to also have a picture. We want to understand the intra-spatial variability within the country. We don't want to treat the entire country as one single observation. We want to actually see that there is variability present within the single season of one year. So that is another motivation of studying or rather coming up with this kind of a Markov random field kind of a model, wherein we want to take into account this spatial coherence and the temporal coherence, which we all believe should be there in any weather model, which tries to model precipitation. So, and we see that like several years have been marked as drought years.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
Yeah. Hi. So this in this plot, I can see that basically the green and the red lines are coming when they cross the dashed lines, right?
Correct.
Yeah. So is this the marking of the dashed lines? Is it like arbitrarily taken or?
That's a very good point. So who decided that more than 10% is flood and less than 10%, less than minus 10% is drought?
Right.
That's again a policy decision that somebody has to make. So it is at some level it is arbitrary, yes. Okay, but it has to be, of course, supported with some information. And perhaps I'm not aware why this 10% and minus 10% are basically the thresholds set by the IMD, but this is the case.
Right.
So there is no.
There could be these lines which are almost there, which indicate probably there is some flood somewhere, but I mean, you would think that it's not because it's not in green.
I do understand what you are saying, but I'm not sure if that is the case.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks.
So yeah, thank you. Okay, so this is once again a plot which is often quoted, like shown in climatological studies, and we basically want to further zoom into this picture and look at the spatial structure or the spatial variability present in each one of these bars. When this bar is talking about flood, what exactly is happening? When this bar is talking about normal year, what is happening? And so on. Okay. Another very standard picture, which is often quoted in climatological talks, this is the average precipitation that you see across the Indian subcontinent, together with the temperature bars. So here you see that in the month of January, the entire India, the average rainfall is very close to almost, I think, 5 mm or less than that. In Feb also it's the same thing, March also same thing. And you see that the bulk of the rainfall happens in the months from June, July, August, September. But you might also want to include October. But then we see that there's a significant jump from September to October. So we might want to say that, well, it is already kind of receding. The monsoon is already on the retreat. So we do see that these 4 months, June, July, August, September, seem to basically account for almost 80% of the total rainfall that we get in the entire year. So it kind of not bad to maybe focus only on these 4 months. So that is what we do. In this study, we are going to be only focusing on these 4 months. But in a continuing study that it's still going on, we are now looking at a much bigger picture, in the sense that we are looking at the entire year and also a bigger geographical region, but with a different model, of course. So but I don't think that we will be talking about that anyway. So we are going to be focusing only on these 4 months, June, July, August, and September. Okay. Now, so these another very obvious implication is that we know that even though we believe that India is totally taken by the IT industry, we are still an agrarian economy. So we still depend a lot on an agriculture, and directly or indirectly, we are all affected by the agricultural crisis, if there is any, caused by the monsoon. So if there are floods, we know that immediately there is inflation, and we run to we poke holes in our pockets. And if there is a drought, the same thing happens. And in fact, from a completely humanitarian perspective, we know that there is the farmer suicides has been a serious concern for the Indian government. So it is a very serious problem, and definitely needs an attention, which perhaps it is getting right now. So a lot of people are needed. Definitely try to understand from their perspective, give their perspective, what exactly are they looking at, because it's like an elephant, and the story of blind people trying to infer about elephant by just touching. So we are all getting some information by observing different perspectives. So what is our contribution? What can we contribute? Most of the time, our contributions are so negligible that we can't even say anything, but at least an attempt can be made and should be made. So the challenge here is that, as I already said, that monsoon is a very complex system. Lot of factors affect monsoon. Not only the planetary physical processes, but also very local, like orographical structures also make a lot of difference. For example, we all know that Cherrapunji in Northeast and Agumbe in along the Western Ghats, they receive the highest amount of rainfall in the entire world. But how, I mean, that is part of my data. So I have to also justify that. And that is a local behavior. I mean, that's a very local structure. So there is a lot of complexity present. And so if I want to model this naively by just saying that, okay, let us look at all the physical processes that are affecting this, the monsoon, and I'm going to consider all these processes in my model, that is going to be a really Herculean task. So what we instead want to do is, so just to say it in words of Sulochana Gadgil, she is really one of the flag bearers of monsoon research in India. She wrote in one of her papers, simulation of the average rainfall associated with Indian summer monsoon, as well as its variation from year to year, has remained a challenge despite the rapid development of complex dynamical models of the atmosphere. So we know that there are lots of institutes in India which have been working in trying to come up with some model for the Indian summer monsoon, but so far we are still scratching the surface. I hope nobody is going to get offended by this statement. So what is our question? We want to answer purely from data centric type of tools. Is it possible to predict droughts and floods? In fact, if I only look at simple, just data-based tools, no physical processes involved, then in 1909, Sir Gabriel Walker had already come up with this suggestion that you should be looking at correlation and regression. And as age old it is, this is still the status quo in many of the cases. Many of the IMD models are simple regression based models, which basically are correlations. So even though this is like a 100-year-old suggestion, it is still very much in action. And we do understand that there are very basic statistical models which do predict Indian summer monsoon rainfall. For example, every year when the IMD predicts the success or the failure of the Indian summer monsoon, those models are actually very basic statistical models. But once again, the problem is that they make these predictions taking into account the entire country as one single data point, and they don't give any predictions for at smaller spatial scales. So they don't give a prediction for Bangalore, for example. They don't give any prediction for Chennai, for instance. So we see that, okay, every year the government comes and then says that, okay, we're going to have a plentiful summer monsoon. But then let's say in Anantapur, people are left waiting for the rain in the entire summer. So they don't get any rain, even though the government said that, yes, it will be plentiful rain. So we have these problems, and we want to basically go into these spatial scales that we want to understand. Okay, so what are we really dealing with? We are basically dealing with monsoon. It is very high dimensional. The processes which basically drive this monsoon are very high dimensional. They are highly complex and they are highly coupled. So the data that we are also getting, it's a large amount of data, that is big N, and many number of variables. We have observations coming from, we can now observe, due to this satellites and reanalysis data that is available in the market, we can actually get several observations on different variables. So we have large number of P also. And the data itself is highly complex, because we know there is a lot of dependent structure present in this data. And the objective clearly is to understand or maybe predict all aspects of monsoon. Okay, a very unreachable goal, I would say. So this is what we are dealing with. And what is the current state of modern statistics? Modern statistics also has a very similar approach, which is basically saying that these days all the models are very high dimensional. They are very intricate and complex. All the time you hear that the data is big. And the structure of the data sets that we are getting these days, it's always all the time you would want to assume that it is a very complex data set. And objectives in modern statistics, they are basically to do the unthinkable, breaking the barriers, pushing the limits to find the answer to life and everything. Of course, the last answer is known to us. Okay, so in short, the classical statistics has been about basically methodology. The modern statistics has been about implementation. So in this talk, I will only be talking about the implementation. I will not be talking about the methodology. We are not developing any methodology. The methodology is already set. The Markov random field model that has been that we are going to be using, it's been in existence for some time. I'm not going to make any changes in that model. I'm only going to be applying that model to this simple data set. Okay, so our contribution in this is really minimal. Okay, so what we are going to be doing is use what is called a graphical approach. What exactly is a graphical approach? So the reality is that whenever we are talking about dependent data, when we want to write down the joint distribution of several variables, it is just not possible to model this, because the space of probability distributions from which I have to pick the distribution which best fits the data, that the question itself doesn't make any sense, because there will be several which will perfectly fit the data, because the data is only finite. Okay, so so one has to come up with several assumptions which will basically make this question a little more easy to answer. So there are several kinds of dependent structures that we are very much aware of. For example, Markov chain is one specific dependent structure. If I assume that the given bunch of random variables are Gaussian, that is a very specific type of a dependent structure, and also the joint distribution is very specifically known to us. So these are kind of assumptions that from the perspective of the practitioner, one can impose. But of course, whenever you are making an assumption, you have to justify the assumption. And hopefully the assumptions that we are going to be invoking here, we will be able to make some justification also. So yeah, so generally this task is extremely difficult. Okay, modeling joint distribution of dependent random variables is extremely hard unless you make any assumptions. So now what we are going to do is give you a very simple recipe, but it seems like it is still going to be quite hard. So let us consider a d-dimensional random vector. Of course, just a simple undergraduate probability. If this is the joint density, I can use what is called the chain rule by basically continually condition on increasing sequence of random variables. So for example, the first two densities together, you can easily see is going to give me the joint distribution of x1 and x2. And then the first three will give me the joint distribution of x1, x2, x3. And then similarly, if I look at the entire product, I will basically get the joint distribution. It looks like an easy recipe. I should be able to do this. But turns out that we actually may not know all these conditional densities. In fact, it may even turn out that if I want to model these densities, if I want to, let's say, estimate these densities, what am I talking about? If I'm talking about this conditional distribution, let's say this is x1, x2 are discrete random variables. How would you encode when you are writing a code? How would you encode this information, this conditional distribution? This is going to be, as you can imagine from Markov chain theory, this is basically like a vector, like a matrix. Okay, so it's a double array. And this is going to be a three-dimensional array. And this is going to be a d-dimensional array. So what we are saying is that if x1 takes k number of values, then this is a k-dimensional, a k-long vector. This is a k by k matrix. This is k by k by k tensor. And this is k to the power of d amount of information that it has. So we see that the amount of data that we have to save, or rather the amount of parameters that we have to model, they are significantly large. So can I make this a little easier? Well, if I knew that x1, x2, xd were Markov chain, okay, then I can immediately write down this conditioning on x1, x2, and this boils down to conditioning only on x2. If I had this long conditioning, all the other x1 to xd minus 2 just vanish because of the Markovian property, and only the conditioning on xd minus 1 will be left. So then in that case, what will happen is that this will be a k vector, and all the other are just k by k matrices. And how many of them? D minus 1. Okay, so suddenly my complexity has reduced significantly. So some kind of assumption, some distributional or structural assumption can significantly improve our computational complexity of the model. So, and also it is possible that maybe I don't know specifically this order. x2 given x1 is not given to me. Okay, but that's not a problem, because we know that any permutation and still the same result will be true. So it's not a problem. And this is what is really the challenge. So the idea is to now, this is not really bad. The formula is very cute, very nice. And we want to basically build on this. Is there any assumption that I can impose which makes this expression a little easy to handle, or a little easy to deal with for modeling? Okay, so that is the plan, the objective. So what we do is something we introduce, or rather we use, is something called a graphical model. And yeah, so this is what I've already mentioned, Markov chain. Something about conditional independence, which we all know, which is coming from the Markovian kind of a property, which says that given the present, the past and the future are independent. Okay. So that is conditional independence. I think we are all familiar with. This exact conditional independence kind of gives us a hint that maybe there is a way to model this, to express this long product a little more simple, in a simpler way. If I knew some dependent structure, some conditional independence rather. And that is precisely represented using what is called a graphical model. So what is a graphical model? Just to begin with the basics of graph, let us look at this graph, which has 6 vertices and it has 7 undirected edges. It has 3 cycles. 1, 2, 5 is one cycle. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is one cycle. And also 2, 3, 4, 5 is a cycle. Okay. And it has 7 cliques. What is a clique? Clique is basically a subset of vertices such that every pair is connected. So if I look at 1, 2, this is a clique because 2 is connected to 1, 1 is connected to 2. Okay. And if I look at 1, 2, 5, this is a clique because every pair is connected. If I look at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, this is not a clique because 2 and 4 and 3 and 5 are not connected. So this is not a clique. So I hope that definition of clique is clear. Now there is something also called a maximal clique. We are not going to be using it though. But what is a maximal clique? Maximal clique is a clique which cannot retain the property of being a clique by adding one more vertex. So for example, 1, 2, 5 is a maximal clique, whereas 1, 2 is not a maximal clique. 1, 2 is not maximal because if I add 5 to this vertex set, then 1, 2, 5 is still a clique. So therefore 1, 2 is not a maximal clique, whereas 1, 2, 5 is a maximal clique because if I add any other vertex to this vertex set, I lose the property of the clique. Okay, so I hope that is clear. So based on this graphical representation, we can define what is called the conditional independence in this undirected graphical model. So what we will do is we will define XA as the set of random variables which correspond to the vertices. So each vertex is to be associated with a random variable. So 4 is associated with the random variable X4. 5 is associated with the random variable X5 and so on. Okay, so each vertex denotes a random variable. Okay, and if I write XA, where A is a subset of the vertex set, then I am looking at this collection of all these random variables which correspond to the subset A. Okay, is it clear? If it's not, just ask right away.
I think it's clear.
Okay, and XB similarly is the collection of all those random variables which correspond to the vertices in the set B. Okay, then the variables XA and XB are said to be conditionally independent, are defined to be conditionally independent if given another vertex set or another bunch of random variables XC, if and only if in this graph C, the vertex set C separates A and B. What does it really mean? It basically means that every path from the set vertex set A to vertex set B must pass through the vertex set C. Okay, so the path from A to B should have a point, should have a vertex which is in C. For example, X3, 4, 6, that is X3, X4, X6 and X1 are conditionally independent given X2 and X5. Okay, so that is a simple example. One more example, if I'm looking at this kind of a lattice structure, okay, then this random variable X8 is kind of cut away the moment I take out X3, X7, X13 and X9. So conditioned on these 4 variables, X8 is independent of all other random variables. Okay, so this is a kind of structure which is very nice, because if I were to really write down the joint distribution of X1 through X20, and if I had to use that chain rule, I would be in deep trouble. So this kind of a dependent structure really, or rather conditional independent structure, helps me reduce that work of writing down that joint distribution. So what is the advantage of having to write this in a very nice shorter way or in a computationally less complex way? The reason is the advantage is that we will have fewer parameters to estimate. The moment we have fewer parameters to estimate, the computational complexity has really gone down significantly. So, and also we have little more belief in our model also. Okay, so then once we have this kind of a structure, there is a standard result by Hammersley Clifford, which basically states that if I have a positive distribution, which is on this set of random variables, okay, so y basically denotes the big vector 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way to 20, x1 through x20. Okay, and if py denotes a joint distribution of these random variables, and if I know that this density is positive, this distribution is strictly positive, then it satisfies this factorization formula. What is the factorization? The factorization is basically that I have the joint distribution py written as products of what are called the potentials. What are these potentials? These potentials are functions which are only restricted to the cliques. So you look at only the cliques. Okay, so for example, in this particular graph, what are the cliques? The cliques are the 1, 1 edges. Okay, for example, all the pairs 1, 2, 2, 3, 2, 7, 7, 8, wherever there is a edge, these are the pairs, they are cliques. Is there any bigger clique, a clique which has more than 2 vertices? I don't see it here. Okay, there are no bigger cliques. So I will basically be looking at the product of all these over all these cliques. And what am I going to do? I'm going to be looking at a potential, which is a function of variables which are in this particular clique only. So this big distribution can be written now as a product over all these edges of these edge potentials. So I just need to define the edge potentials. I need to know what exactly is the relationship between x1 and xx. If there is any way of understanding or encoding this information, that how x1 and x6 are related to one another, I can put that information in this psi and I call that the edge potential. Another thing is that I just said that these are edge potentials. So did I want any specific property that these edge potentials should satisfy? Well, yes, they should be positive. The only requirement is that they should be positive. Okay, because we are talking about probabilities. Okay, and the interesting thing is they need not be probability measures. So even though we are talking about product of these functionals, typically when we were writing using the chain formula, in the chain formula, every term was indeed a probability distribution in itself. Whereas here, these potentials are not. So I don't need to worry about the normalization here itself, which is why I have the bigger normalization here. Okay, because this product itself may not give me the probability distribution. It might just integrate to something which is a very big number. Okay, so which is why we need to have this normalization constant. All right. Now, the graphical model, I hope that is clear. What exactly is the graphical model? It's basically just representing random variables as vertices in a graph, and the edges represent some sort of a relationship that we know about these random variables. So let me propose this model. What exactly are we looking at? We are looking at several types of random variables. There are these x's, then there are these z's, then there are these v's, then there are these u's, and then there are these y's. Okay, so there are 5 variable types that I'm looking at. All right, what exactly are these? X's are basically observables, things which I can observe. Z's are the hidden variables, which are indicators of how out of ordinary is X, okay, at that particular vertex. Okay, so at 1, 1, this is what I observe. X 1, 1 is what I observe. But Z 1, 1 tells me how out of ordinary is this X 1, 1. What do I really mean? This basically is that whenever Z equals to 1, I believe that this means that X is the corresponding value of X is very high. Okay, and you can define the other value. Like you can set Z to be 0 or 2, whatever you want, whenever the value of X is less than what you believe, what should be. Okay, so you can have another level which says 0, Z is 0 when things are like normal. Okay, all right. So what does this lead to? I will explain all those variables, but let me just get to what exactly do I want. By doing this kind of by coming up with this kind of a model, if I can come up with the posterior distribution of Z given X, okay, given X, U, V, and Y, if I can write down the conditional distribution of Z, then I can, what I would get is basically this configuration of these ones and zeros at different vertices. And this is a nice discrete representation of how out of ordinary the X's were at different locations. Okay, so if I see that the Z values at all these places were 1, that means all these places received the corresponding X value was significantly very high. If all these Z's were 0, I would say the corresponding X values were all very low. Okay, so that is a kind of interpretation. Whereas if I'm only going to look at X values, I don't know, because 11, if let's say X is the value of X is 11, I don't know whether 11 is low or high relative to what. Okay, and that exactly is encoded in Z. Okay, for example, for Bangalore, a rainfall of 2 mm a day is not terrible. It's not really high rainfall. Whereas 2 mm in a desert is significantly high rainfall, because they are not used to rainfall at all. I mean, the mean over there is mostly 0. Okay, so when we say that, oh, we had a very significantly heavy rainfall, we mean to the order of, let's say, 30 mm, or for example, a day before yesterday, when it rained in Bangalore, it rained 139 mm in 4 hours. That is significantly high for us, but that is significantly high also for a desert. But is that significantly high for Agumbe or Cherrapunji? Maybe not. So this Z basically encodes the information relative to the position. Okay, so it basically tells me whether the corresponding X value is high or low in relation to that particular position. Okay.
So Shrikar,
yes.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Just go back to your previous slide, maybe. So is your assumption here that the collection, so each site has these 2 variables, X and Z. So is your assumption here that the X and Z's, so Z is somehow a function of X. So is your assumption that the Z's form a Markov random field, or is your assumption that the X
the entire collection of these random variables, this graphical model is called the Markov random field.
So this entire thing. Okay,
yes.
I see.
Okay, so and now your question about which is following the Markov chain will come when I will talk about these edge potentials. Okay, because this edge potential Z11, Z12 is connected through this edge. So what is the edge potential over this edge? And Z11 to Z21, what is the edge potential on this edge? I need to tell you all that, and then that is where you will see this all that colloquial knowledge that we have gained over several years. We can actually encode that in these edge potentials. Okay, so that's what you will see. So by the way, S basically represents number of spatial locations. D represents the number of days. Okay, so we have 8 years data, and this is daily data. So this is 796 days, and we have 357 locations. Okay, so once I have this kind of a 0-1 type of a picture, I can start looking at some sort of a spatial coherence, and I can look at these. This will basically give me some sort of a excursion set, but of a different type, in the sense that it is not thresholded at a uniform threshold. The threshold is not uniform for all the locations. Okay, because if I set the threshold 10, then none of the locations in low areas of X's will go beyond X, go beyond 10. Whereas all the locations in Western Ghat and the northeastern states will go beyond 10. So this is kind of an excursion set, but of a different type, in the sense that the thresholding is happening at is non-uniform, it's not homogeneous at the different locations. Okay, so this will basically give us some sort of a clustering also, and it is very different from the kind of clustering that usual unsupervised learning algorithms give us, like k-means and PCA. This is very different. Okay, so let me just quickly explain what exactly are the variables, because that is more essential, and I'm really running out of time. So just to give you the picture, that we are looking at 2000 to 2007, the data, 357 locations. These are basically grid boxes of size 100 by 100 kilometer all across India. So these are not specific locations, these are really boxes. Okay, so the entire India is basically like pixelized. Okay, so XXT is basically the volume of rain at grid location S and day T. So that is X. Can we guess the distribution? Maybe yes, actually. Okay, depends on what is the value of Z. If Z tells me that it's high, okay, then, or if it tells me that it's some sort of a active season or a break season, then I can correspondingly guess the distribution of X. For example, if I know it is a typical day in January, I know that if I'm in Delhi, the chance of rain is 0. Okay, a typical day. All right. So if I'm looking at a typical day in Chennai in the month of November, the chance of rain is significantly high, because we are looking at the winter monsoon. Okay, so depends on the corresponding Z encoding. Okay, so this is precisely what I have written here, that Z basically encodes this information. Okay, the distribution of X will be encoded via Z. What are U and V? The U and V are basically some sort of cluster assignments. They basically tell us how similar are two vectors. Now, if you go back to this picture, no, the picture is here, right here. Yeah, U's are basically indexed from 1 to D. So they are basically different days. So first day, I will assign this first day the entire spatial expanse of rainfall that I get. I will assign it a tag, an index, and I say that two spatial patterns are, if they are similar in some way, then I give them similar tags. Okay, so two spatial expanses, if they are similar, I will give them similar tags. That is what we want to do. So U is going to encode this spatial patterning in the setup. And what are V's going to do? V's are going to be, for example, if I fix 1 and I'm looking at these 1, 2, 3, 4 all the way to D, this is like a time series at the location 1. So at location 1, I'm looking at the rainfall time series. And then V's are basically going to encode, if two time series are very similar, I will put them together. I will tag them together. I will say that they have a similar tag. Okay, and this is basically the clustering index for the days. This is the clustering, locations, and this is the clustering index for the days. Okay, so each day will have a cluster assignment, and each location has a cluster assignment. Okay, and what are these Y's? Y's are basically the total rainfall on this one single day, on this entire day. Okay, and this Y2 is a total rainfall on day 2 in the entire country. Okay, all the 357 locations is just aggregate. Okay, and I have a link between Y1 and U1 because I want to have some sort of a spatial coherence to attached to these spatial patterns. Okay, and I will basically these edge potentials will make everything a little clearer, hopefully. So looking at that graphical picture, I can write down the joint distribution like this. Okay, so I have these marginals. which correspond to the cluster indices, which are, this is for the days, these are for the locations. And then I have these different edge potentials. This is edge potential between Zs at 2 different time points, which are neighboring. This is the edge potential between the 2 spatial locations, which are neighboring. This is the edge potential between the Z and the, yes. Yeah, so this is the edge potential between the Z and the corresponding cluster assignment. This is again the Z between and with the correct corresponding cluster assignment of the day. This was for the space location, this is for the time. And then I have the disk distribution, which gives me the edge potential between the Z and the X. This is precisely what we asked. Can we answer the question, what is the distribution of the rainfall? Okay, so this basically will encode that information. And finally, the edge which is between UT and YT, which is this edge. Okay, and now let us see. I hope I can do this in few minutes. Prior on U, so we need some prior distribution on U. So for that, we propose a Chinese restaurant process. So what we do is, so what is the advantage of having to do this Chinese restaurant process? What we do is, let us say that U1 is 1. And then you move to U2, conditioned on the past values, you define, you assign U2 either a new value with some probability or the old value with this probability. What is this probability? This probability is basically saying that how many days have already been assigned the tag U and how many years have at least one of these tags. So NT basically counts the number of days which already have assigned cluster assignment U, and M basically tells you how many years have such a cluster assignment. The idea of adding, putting this extra factor of M was to ensure that we don't end up getting a very localized pattern which is specific to one particular year. So that any pattern which is appearing is actually really a global pattern in the sense of the time, that it is not very specific to one specific year, that year was dominating the entire data set. Okay. So same goes with V. The advantage of having chosen this Chinese restaurant process as a prior is that the number of cluster assignments we have, or the tags, the number of tags I have is not known to me. That itself is random. Okay, that itself keeps changing. So that is kind of an advantage because I don't know how many patterns are there, how many similarities I can see in the data set. So that itself, if I impose from my side, it will be a kind of a bias. So I don't want to introduce a bias from my side already. So which is why Chinese restaurant process is kind of useful. Next is a prior on Z. So you might say that these are basically indicator functions. These are parameters which are chosen by the user. And you might say that this is 0 whenever these are two different, and you said that potentials cannot be 0. They have to be strictly positive. Well, whenever they are different, you'll assign them a very, very small value. Okay, basically some sort of a computer 0.
Shikhar?
Yes, I know I'm quite very much. So let me just directly go to the results. So what we do is basically fit this random field model, estimate the parameters, and then compute this posterior distribution of Z given X. Okay, Z given X is the distribution that I'm looking at. Then I compute the modes of the Zs. Okay, and then I'll compute what exactly are the corresponding U's which are basically the spatial patterns. And these turn out to be the top 10 spatial patterns that I received after having done this exercise. And I'm sorry that the model itself I could not really explain very well, but the end result is that after doing this analysis on the posterior probability distribution of Z given X, I basically get this these 10 patterns. So what exactly are we looking at? These patterns, you have to read from here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. These are arranged in the order of the number of days that are assigned to these patterns. This has most number of days. This is next highest, then next highest, then so on. This has the least number of days assigned to this pattern. Okay, so if I look at it, this is already looking like giving me some sort of a picture, in the sense that patterns 1, 2, 3 correspond to only rainfall in either northeast or this tiny portion of the Western Ghat. This seems to say that we are talking about pre-onset or post-retreat or a break spell. And then if I'm looking at these patterns, they which talk about the central India, this here, and this here. They tell me something about the rainfall pattern in the central India and then the western coast. Although these three look very much similar, but apparently I won't be able to see. I show you that the corresponding rainfall, the aggregate rainfall, is very significantly different. And then the other leftover patterns, they talk about basically this, and this. You can easily see they are talking about something like some sort of a Gangetic plain. They seem to resemble the rainfall pattern in Gangetic plains. So this is what we saw. The corresponding rainfall is this, that this has the maximum amount of rainfall. This has the least amount of rainfall. And if I look at the spatial distribution, the temporal distribution of these patterns. So pattern number 1 has most number of days coming from June and September, June and September. And June and September, we know, do not correspond to very high rainfall. Very high rainfall happens typically in July and August. And we saw that in the first few pictures. So pattern number 1, which was looking like a very dry pattern, does not receive a lot of rainfall, is indeed basically showing that, in the sense that June and September are peaking. And the same goes with other patterns. I can share the slides and you can take a look. I think I should stop because I'm way beyond the time. Yeah, I would just stop here. There are several other stories that I can say, but I would not. Thank you. If there are any questions, I would be happy to answer.
So let's thank Shrikar together for his wonderful talk. The floor is open for questions.
Okay, Shrikar. So I think this is a very natural question to ask. This is Sivaguru here. This is all trying to model existing data, right?
That is correct.
So the natural thing is, can this be used for prediction? And if so, have you done it, or what should one expect? What are the caveats?
So the thing is that we very earnestly did not want to go into the prediction realm because it's a very sensitive topic. If we make any prediction and if we want to publish a paper, people would be at our throat. So we didn't want to make any such predictions, which would we didn't want to make any predictions. But the fact of the matter is that the same model can be trained for the next year. So you can get some sort of because it's a model eventually, right? So it is giving you, and to be very, very clear, the kind of conclusions that we are drawing from here is basically mean behavior. And for being able to predict, we need to understand the variability also. So I need to understand what exactly is this confidence band. I need to understand what exactly the distribution. I am basically talking about the expected value level kind of a conclusion that I have drawn. The conclusions are basically at the level of mean. That on the mean behavior, these are the big patterns that we have seen. Okay, so right now it is like some sort of a global picture that we are looking at. However, if you want to model really go into the deep and then model site by site, the model does not stop you from doing that. Okay, so you can train the entire model on the data set that is available to you, and then perhaps you can talk about is x, s, or z, s, comma, t plus 1, where t is the current time and t plus 1 is tomorrow. Okay, so one can do that, but I don't know how good is the prediction going to be, because we did not explore that.
Thanks. The short answer is fear for life.
Fear for life, that is correct. In fact, we were thinking that apparently there is a law which states that we should not be, I mean, non-government agencies should not be making any predictions on the monsoon. And somebody told us, but it turns out that it is not correct. So there are private companies which are doing predictions now. And the reason for this this rumor or whatever, if it was true, then the reason is that because a lot of people, their lives depend on monsoon, and if some viral message goes saying that there will be like a deluge tomorrow, and all the farmers run away from their farms and will be in trouble. So yeah, I mean, I don't know what the truth is, but SkyMet is there; they make predictions.
Any further questions from the audience? Okay, let's thank Shrikar again for his wonderful talk, and see you next week.
Thank
Thanks,
you. Can you stop recording?
Oh, of
Please.
course.